In our next session, we delve into the intricate world of technology and manufacturing with Revathi Advaithi, the CEO of Flex. Advaithi has led Flex's workforce spanning 30 countries in a transformation to define a new era in manufacturing. Under her leadership, Flex has focused on driving technology innovation, supply chain resilience, and responsible, sustainable manufacturing solutions across various industries and markets. She's in conversation with HT's tech editor, Vishal Mathur.
I would like to welcome all our viewers to this year's Hindustan Times Leadership Summit, an edition that's more special than most because this is the year when the Hindustan Times that you love is now 100 years strong. And it's even more special because we are joined by somebody who is going to decode the accelerated transition that we are in the midst of, with technology leading the way. We are joined by Revathi Advaithi, the CEO of Flex, a company that's been doing what it's been doing for more than 50 years now. They're the ones who do the God's work. They place the solid foundations on which a lot of other tech companies can also build their experiences. There are a lot of domains they're working with. Data centers is one, automotive tech is another, healthcare being another one. Now, I want to get this right, which is why I will read this off from a sheet of paper. For Revathi, there are very few compromises that can actually happen. Driving technology innovation, supply chain resistance, and responsible, sustainable manufacturing are non-negotiables. Thank you so much, Revathi, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Vishal. Looking forward to it.
Pleasure. If I may get in with a question you probably would have been expecting, the overarching theme of the times that we live in, artificial intelligence. As I always say, the thickening envelope of AI around the way we work, the way we live, the way we communicate. Now that it's no longer in the realm of science fiction and we have intelligent models in our phones and our PCs, we are editing images, we are summarizing PDF documents and whatnot. How do you really see AI developing, and what's your take on the broader landscape that we are building towards?
Yeah, I would say every question, every interview has to start with AI these days because obviously it is the force that's reshaping, I would say, all our lives and the world around us. And, I'll talk about AI in a few different forms. At Flex, the important thing is the end markets that we participate in are usually around automotive, healthcare, consumer end markets, and then, of course, everything around data center infrastructure building. And but so if you think about from the consumer viewpoint, you see the change every day, right? Because you're using AI in everyday life these days, whether you search it or whether you're looking for help with different aspects of your life itself. We see that in consumer products that we manufacture, that AI is becoming a part of how the consumer interacts with the product itself. But the real transformation, I think, really comes in things like healthcare, which is significant. The large amounts of data that can be enhanced using the ability to generate quick amounts of thesis around healthcare sector is pretty significant. So I'd say healthcare is probably the transformative area that we have barely seen today. So I think that's an important part to focus on. And then, of course, in automotive, we manufacture everything from electric vehicle platforms to everything around autonomous. And, I don't know how much of a topic autonomous is in India now, but in the US, it's a pretty significant conversation, right? Everything around robo taxis. And we see that present in every large urban market today, whether you're in San Francisco or Austin, you see autonomous cars driving around. That is all about harnessing the power of AI, understanding all the data and information that's coming into the vehicle. It's a software-defined vehicle. So in our generation, in the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to be sitting in this car that is making everyday decisions using all the intelligence that it is getting and making decisions on which turn it's going to take, where it's going to stop, and all those things. So the significance of AI, I would say, in almost every sector, you can start to feel some of those today. But in the industrial sector, let me step back and talk about that for a second. you see that in simple ways. Like, for example, in a factory floor like ours, if you're looking at kind of decision making around quality. So if you're looking at a board, or if you're looking at a product, in the past, you didn't have the ability to harness lots of data real time and make a decision, around machine learning and decide whether this was a good quality product or what was happening with it. It was a little bit of a reactive process. Today, we are able to, include all that machine learning in our day-to-day work around the factory itself, which is a significant example of how we use it today. But I would say there's a lot to be done, Vishal. I think that's important to remember. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, I'm sure, later. In the industrial sector, what has happened over the last 20, 30 years is we've all been sold solutions by enterprise companies that are piecemeal software that we've all integrated into our work, into our factory. And the data doesn't talk to each other. So I'd say AI looks very cool in many areas. It's going to be transformative in many areas, but it's also going to take time in many areas. So I think it is definitely a transformation we're all looking forward to, but there's the practical aspect of it in terms of how much and how fast that we're going to all have to wait and watch.
You mentioned some examples of AI being in use on the factory floor, for example. That brings me to this question about how we as humans, a lot of us look at generative AI in particular with a lot of suspicion that it's going to take away jobs from humans. How do you place this?
I'd say first is, let me step back and say, I'll make a comment about manufacturing itself globally, right? If you look at the last 2 decades, with everything that's happened around manufacturing and factories around the world, which is moving things from one area to the other, the onset of kind of the internet and the computer and the use of all that data information, manufacturing productivity in the last 2 decades has barely moved globally, right? So despite all the hype and all the conversation around how much technology assists in terms of productivity and is it going to take jobs away, it really hasn't done much, right, over the last few decades. So that's history. But everyone says AI is going to be different, and think about AGI, and eventually it's going to replace humans and all of that. And I would say that, my thesis will be, I would think about it as an assistant to humans, right? And this debate about, whether it takes jobs away, of course, has relevancy to a company like ours, which has a large employee base and things like that. But I think it's somewhere in the middle, right? I think it'll have a net zero effect in terms of employment overall. Okay, that's controversial because a lot of people don't believe that. It's all about, hey, AGI and, it's going to replace humans and things like that. I truly believe that it has a net zero effect in employment. I think that the productivity boost that AI will bring will probably not reduce jobs directly, but will redistribute jobs and upskill the workforce overall, right? So global GDP will benefit from AI as the skill level of workers increase. It'll drive productivity gains in some way, but I do not think that it'll impact the overall job numbers significantly. So I agree with the co-pilot approach concept of AI agents and all of that as it works together, as it advances AGI. But I'm of the belief that it'll all be around empowering humans, not replacing humans. And that's my thesis today. We'll talk about it in 10 more years and see whether I'm right or wrong.
From Vits Pilani to running a company with over 140,000 employees in more than 30 countries, we would love to know more about the moments that shaped how you look at a business, how you look at your professional life, and that intersection of technology with our everyday lives.
Yeah, my background is probably like a lot of middle-class Indians, Vishal. I grew up all over India. I'm the child of a chemical engineer. My mother was a homemaker. We moved all around India, for my father's career. And, like most Indians, you end up in my generation, you end up being an engineer or a doctor. I liked hands-on things, and I ended up becoming a mechanical engineer in Pilani, which is an odd choice because girls really don't end up becoming a mechanical engineer. And I enjoyed kind of the hands-on aspect of engineering. I didn't love the theoretical aspect of engineering. So as I was trying to find kind of what my future would be, I ended up in the factory floor because I just loved how things are made. And I felt like as the world was going towards IT and computer science and all of that, I moved into like the factory floor and manufacturing companies because I felt like that's where I understood the heartbeat and pulse of how things was getting made. So that's where life started for me, I would say, in terms of my career and, where I learned about manufacturing. But obviously, manufacturing is intertwined with technology, right? I mean, it's about these fancy machines and CNC machines and how they're programmed and how you make products and all of that stuff. But I think the more important part of all of this is understanding people, right? For me, it was all about understanding, managing and leading shop floor people. What does make people tick, right? Whether it is in India or whether it's in small towns in the United States, or I lived and worked in UK and in China. It all became around not just technology and how technology comes together, but what is it about people that makes it who they are, and what makes them excited about kind of being part of an ecosystem and bringing their best. So my journey has been not only about being fascinated about technology, but I always say I probably am more of a psychologist than anything else, because I'm really motivated about, what makes people who they are, and then how do you bring all that together in strategies and running company like ours, which is all around innovation technology, but a huge part of it is about the culture that then brings everything together. So I would say, all of that came together with where I am today.
Flex has a significant business with data centers. It's an important part of what Flex is. Would you say we are again at that pivotal moment in time, much like a few years ago when cloud computing kind of gave us a new trajectory? Now it is the time of artificial intelligence to really give us the importance of ramping up compute power, because that is where the future is headed?
Oh my gosh, I think, Vishal, it's even more significant than that, right? So what Flex does for data centers is we are part of building the data center infrastructure. So we build it both from kind of outside the IT infrastructure system, because we develop and deploy the power. So we build everything in terms of the power that goes on the chip, the power that comes to the rack itself and to the data center itself. And then we integrate all the IT solutions. So we put the servers, the storage, the networking products, all that together. So one of the only companies, I would say globally, that does both the infrastructure and the IT systems and puts it together. And so we're in this very, very unique situation of what we provide to data centers. And if you think about the growth that's happening with data centers, the numbers are staggering, right? Just in the last few weeks alone, if you look at all the hyperscale earnings announcements, some $300 billion of capital investment that has been committed over the next few years, into data centers itself. And I think the growth is projected at something at like an 18.5%, 19% CAGR, right? Which is significant over the next 3 years. The hardest part about everything is, of course, the power required, to be driving all of this. And that tends to be the long pole in the tent. Like we're talking about, storage racks and server racks that were running at 30 kilowatt power. And now we're working on 250 kilowatt power, 1 megawatt power in a rack. So the power associated with this is pretty significant. And then there's going to be the transition of, everybody will focus around data centers, around kind of the training models that need to be trained. And eventually it'll also be about the edge data centers that is needed for AI processing. So Flex is in this unique position of really providing end-to-end data center infrastructure. And I would say if you look at the commitments that are being made, for the first time in the US, if you look at the last few decades, the power requirement is finally going up in terms of what is required, purely driven by data centers. So I would say this is a significant change, more than what happened in the compute time. And I would say that the investments are going to be significant. And what we see over the next 2 decades in terms of AI, both in terms of data centers and power required to deliver data centers, will be nothing like what history has shown us. So I would say we are in a unique position in what is happening in the industry today. And companies like Flex, who happen to have a great portfolio, are all going to benefit from it.
A few years ago, the pandemic kind of taught us the importance of a plan B with the supply chain issues that we face at that point of time. Do you believe the supply chain logistics as well as overall manufacturing processes have improved in the due course of time to have some sort of a fail-safe in place for an eventuality like that?
Vishal, I have been very vocal about what happened with that supply chain resiliency crisis, right? Because I've said that it was disappointing to see that in this day and age of AI and data and information, the supply chain crisis, driven by the pandemic to some extent, but ended up in terms of how people dealt with it was in the traditional way of let me just ramp up demand because there isn't enough supply, and then try to create this kind of effect where there is a bubble created. And that's how the world dealt with the supply chain crisis. And then on top of that, forget the pandemic, then you add all the geopolitical crisis today, right? It's all about tariffs. It's all about kind of enjoying the manufacturing associated in your country for your country, which has really driven supply chain resiliency conversation to a different level altogether. So I'd say we have learned from the pandemic and the big crisis that happened in the last few years. So what a lot of customers are doing is to say, let's move product closest to the point of consumer requirement. So we reduce all the variables that we have to deal with in the event of any crisis, whether it's associated with trade or weather or cyber or anything else. So that is a pretty significant shift. So we're seeing a major redistribution of supply chains across the world. India is a great beneficiary of it. So that's one big trend that is happening and will continue to happen. And then I would say technology has evolved, like in terms of innovation, you see people being more creative in terms of using simulation and things like that to solve problems using technology that they may have not done before, right? So I think those things have improved pretty significantly. I don't know yet whether we have improved in terms of using data and information for not creating supply chain bottlenecks globally, because we're still a global supply chain. Doesn't matter if redistribution is happening of manufacturing around the world. So I don't know if that has happened yet. Particularly in constrained areas like semiconductors. I think we'll have to see how we manage through the next crisis. But I'd say we have learned a lot. A redistribution is happening of global supply chain because of what has happened through that crisis. Technology use is happening more significantly than it's ever happened before. You see that in Flex itself, right? We probably are more better today in terms of simulating our factories and setting them up real time before we actually set them up, which we may not have done in the past. So you see all those examples that have really changed. So I'd say, a lot has changed. Regionalization, as I've said, in terms of redistribution of supply chain has become a thing. And it'll happen more and more as geopolitics, the noise increases, so that you definitely see that acceleration. So a lot of learnings have come out of it, but I've been doing this for 30 years. I would say there's a long ways to go still.
Truer words have hardly ever been spoken. What sort of a role do you see India playing in the next few years, particularly with stuff like artificial intelligence, manufacturing, and perhaps even data centers? Because it may be a case of a one-shot success because there are a lot of other countries which are vying for the same sort of stuff.
I'd say India has made a lot of progress in the last decade, right? If you think about infrastructure and how much it's improved, the focus on streamlined processes, reduce bureaucracy, all the incentive schemes, whether it's Digital India or PLI, all those have helped in terms of building overall a manufacturing capability for India. That we've seen play out, right? Like today we talk about making complete iPhones in India that is being made that even 5 years ago wouldn't have been thought to be possible. So I would say the kind of the geopolitics and the redistribution of supply chain has definitely been, India has been a beneficiary of it. But India has also deserved being a beneficiary of it because it has improved things like infrastructure, and the role of the government in terms of really driving an end-to-end supply chain has been helpful. I would say in terms of kind of AI and things like that, India has put a lot of work into developing a semiconductor ecosystem. You've seen things like announcements from Micron and all of that in terms of made in India. But I think there's a lot more to do. Building a semiconductor ecosystem is not that easy, right? I would say from a design capability, India has a lot of very able people to help with that in terms of actually manufacturing fabs and everything. You're seeing a lot of announcements come, but that's a significant role that India can play, particularly as geopolitics impacts where semiconductors are made, how it's made. I think that's a critical area to be solved for. And then I'd say end to end in terms of, I have been a huge proponent of India needs to focus on building an end-to-end supply chain. Till you can build an end-to-end supply chain, it can't be holistic and robust. You can't be importing a lot of products from different parts of the world and put product together in India. But India is making a lot of progress on that. And that, I think, is significant advancement in terms of what I've seen. So I'd say India is playing a significant role. I think that a lot has changed in the last 5 years. And it definitely will continue to do that, particularly if it builds a semiconductor ecosystem that is required, I would say, for kind of Western economies like the United States.
To end our conversation on a lighter note, I wanted to understand, have you integrated any AI chatbots in your workflow, perhaps at home or at work, maybe to transcribe a voice recording or meetings perhaps?
Yeah, so I'll start with work. I'd say yes. We have our own instance of AI tool that we use across Flex. We had to do that pretty quickly, because people were going into kind of Anthropic tool or ChatGPT tool to use it for assisting. So it's built into our systems to help with drafting emails or transcribing meetings and all of that. So you see that as a standard part of, our system today. We also use it for coding, which you see that a lot of developers are using that. So that's being used. So a lot of the basic stuff, it's definitely, being integrated into our business. I would say personally, I use it a lot. My family uses it a lot. We use it. I think we almost don't look at anything without going into some kind of an AI tool. I use Cloud a lot, which is an Anthropic tool, and then I also use Chat and all the other tools almost for anything. Like in a funny way, I did a little bit of a riddle for my husband's birthday and put a 10-page PowerPoint presentation together, and I used the AI tool for the entire thing. And it took hardly 15 minutes to do. And my kids were so impressed. They were like, "Mom, you did this whole thing?" I said, "Yeah, I used AI." So that was even more impressive. So it definitely has become a pretty significant part, I would say, of our overall life, whether it's to decode health issues or whether it's to make decisions on day-to-day things. Personally and professionally, I think it's become an integral part of our lives. And all that has happened just in a year. So quite a lot happening around AI. I don't think there is a person today who would say that's not integrated into their lives personally and professionally. So I'm super excited about this innovation and what that does to work and our personal lives. I think it's going to revolutionize all our lives.
Thank you so much, Revathi, for speaking with us.
Thanks, Vishal. Thanks for taking the time, and have a good summit.
Thank you.